The Texas air was dry and hot, carrying the scent of dust and promises. But that morning, on Samuel Travis's property, the only scent was fear. 3 men on horseback, arrogance etched onto their faces, surveyed the simple wooden house, the well-maintained corral, and the small cornfield just beginning to turn golden under the sun. At their forefront, imposing on his black horse, sat Colonel Lawson McAllister Crowley, a man whose power grew like a long shadow over the county. He didn't look at the land like a farmer, but as a king surveys a map, a territory to be conquered. Samuel Travis stood on the porch, unarmed. His shoulders were broad, the result of a lifetime of hard labor, but at that moment, they seemed to bear the weight of an injustice he didn't yet fully comprehend. His eyes, however, showed no terror, but a stubborn calm, a dignity that irked the colonel more than any weapon could. "Travis," Crowley's voice cut through the silence, rough and filled with an authority that admitted no challenge. "Sign the paper. It's a fair offer. More than fair, considering this land, by right of grant from the new government, already belongs to me." Samuel didn't move. He held a yellowed piece of paper in his hand, an old deed, bearing his father's signature. "This land has an owner, Colonel, and his name is in the blood that was spilled to make it free. My father fought for this ground. He said Texas was a promise, not a business." Crowley let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your father was a dreamer, Travis, and dreamers die poor. Reality is made of documents, of laws, and the law now says this property is mine. I have the titles registered in Austin. You have—" He gestured dismissively at the paper in Samuel's hand. "For memories." One of the colonel's henchmen spat on the ground near Samuel's feet. The provocation was clear. Samuel clenched his fist but didn't yield. His mind drifted back to an afternoon years ago. He was just a boy, and his father had taken him to see a rally. A tall man wearing a coonskin hat spoke to the crowd. He didn't speak like a politician, but like a neighbor. He spoke of honor, of community, of fighting for what's right, not what's easy. Davy Crockett. The name was a legend, but to Samuel's father, it was gospel. "Remember, son," his father had told him on the way home, "Texas wasn't built by men who bow, but by men who stand up, even when they're alone." Samuel had already seen the signs of danger approaching. Crowleys, visits to neighbors, the offers that sounded more like threats, the small farmers who, one by one, sold their land for a fraction of its worth and left in the night. As if fleeing a plague, he had ignored it. In faith of justice, in loyalty to his father's promise, now the plague was at his door. "You have until sundown to gather your belongings and get out," Crowley decreed, his smile tightening into a thin, cruel line. "If I find one nail of yours on this land when the sun sets, my men will have permission to burn it along with this your house." The colonel turned his horse, not waiting for a reply. For him, the conversation was over. The world was made of predators and prey, and he never doubted which side he was on. As dust billowed with the departure of the riders, Samuel Travis stood motionless, staring at the horizon. He didn't just see the loss of his home, of his inheritance. He saw the soul of Texas being sold piece by piece to men who mistook power for honor. He felt a cold fury grow in his chest, a fury that was not loud, but deep and patient. The warm desert wind, which had once carried hope, now seemed to carry a warning. If you believe an ordinary man cannot face power, wait to see what happens when a good man's honor is wounded. Injustice, once planted, takes deep roots. Within days, Samuel Travis's life was turned upside down. He was forced to take shelter in the small back room of the local church, a favor granted by the pastor, who did so with downcast eyes, fearing Colonel Crowley's wrath. The community, once united and supportive, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and fear. Men averted their gaze on the street. Women blessed him in whispers. No one dared offer open help, for Crowley's shadow was long and his vengeance certain. Samuel's former property, the Travis Ranch, became the new symbol of the Colonel's power. He organized a grand party, inviting politicians and businessmen from neighboring counties. Loud music and laughter echoed through the valley, a profane celebration on land that still held Samuel's family's sweat and dreams. Crowley, drunk on power and whiskey, made sure to humiliate him publicly. Amidst the party, he raised a toast to new times, to men of vision who don't cling to the past but build the future, he declared, looking directly at the small town below as if he knew Samuel would be listening. Some call it progress, others, the weak, call it loss. But the truth is, the land belongs to those with the courage to take it. The humiliation was a burning ember in Samuel's chest. He tried to seek justice through legal means. He went to the town judge, a stern-looking man, but whose eyes trembled whenever Crowley's name was mentioned. The judge leafed through Samuel's papers with disinterest, then compared them with the Colonel's copied documents, stamped and sealed in Austin. "I'm sorry, Mr. Travis," the judge said, unable to meet his gaze. "The law is clear. The property belongs to Colonel Crowley. The case is closed." Samuel left the courthouse feeling the weight of loneliness. It wasn't just his land that had been stolen, but his faith in the system his father and so many others had died to build. That night, in the silence of his makeshift room, he remembered another story from his father, a story about Davy Crockett in Congress. A wealthy and influential politician tried to pass a law that would benefit his friends, dispossessing small farmers of their land for a grand project. Crockett, seeing the injustice, stood up. He didn't use difficult words or legal jargon. He simply told a story about one of his neighbors, an honest man who would lose everything. He spoke with such simplicity and truth that he shamed the entire Congress. The law was defeated. "Crockett didn't fight with force, son," his father had concluded. "He fought with truth, and truth, sooner or later, always finds a crack in the tyrant's armor." That memory was like a glass of cold water on a scorching day. Samuel realized he was trying to play Crowley's game by Crowley's rules. He needed to find the truth. Hope, as fragile as a candle flame, flickered from where he least expected it. Hidden in the shadows near the tavern, trying to avoid glances, he overheard two of Crowley's henchmen talking, drunk and careless. "The Colonel's smart," one of them said. "He writes everything down in that black book of his. Every piece of land, every deal, every cent paid to the judge. He says it's his guarantee, so no one in Austin tries to betray him. A black book, a guarantee, a crack in the armor." Samuel moved away, his heart beating faster. The anger he felt began to transform into something more dangerous, a plan. He looked at the lights of his former home, now a palace of arrogance for the Colonel. Every humiliation he suffered, every pitying glance, every door slammed in his face, had planted something new inside him, something growing stronger than fear. Colonel Lawson McAllister Crowley didn't know it, but by stepping onto that ranch, by mocking the memory of a good man, he had just awakened the wrong man. Despair gave way to patience. Samuel Travis stopped fighting against walls and began to observe them. He began to live in the shadows, a ghost in his own town. By day, he did odd jobs, mending fences and caring for horses on distant ranches, enough for a plate of food and so no one would suspect. But by night, he became another man, a hunter. His target wasn't an animal, but Colonel Crowley's habits. He memorized the guards' patrol times, the hour the colonel went to his office, the window that was always left slightly ajar to let in the night air. He was mapping the enemy's fortress, not with the intention of invading, but of understanding. He knew brute force would be suicide. Truth, as his father said, needed a path to come to light. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed someone who knew the fortress from the inside, someone who hated Crowley as much as he did, and he knew exactly who to seek out. Abigail Merritt lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, a recluse by choice. Her husband, a respected surveyor, had refused to sign Crowley's fraudulent new maps. 2 weeks later, he left for a job in another region and was never seen again. The official story was a river accident. Abigail never believed it. She lived with silent grief and contained fury. When Samuel knocked on her door, she received him with suspicion. Her eyes were sunken, but still held a spark of fire. "What do you want, Travis? Pity? I have none to give," she said, her voice hardened by loss. "I don't want pity, Mrs. Merritt. I want justice," Samuel replied calmly. "The colonel has a book, a black book where he records all his crimes. I know where he keeps it, but I don't know how to get to it without being seen." Abigail studied him for a long moment. She saw in his eyes the same pain she felt, the same thirst for a justice. That seemed unreachable. "My husband designed that house," she said finally, her voice a little softer. "He was proud of the service passages, the little secrets only he knew. He said a house should have escape routes in case the owner ever became a prisoner." That night, by the light of a lantern, Abigail drew from memory on a piece of leather the blueprints of Crowley's mansion. She pointed to a small passage in the cellar, used for bringing in firewood, which led to a ventilation shaft that ran behind the office wall. It was risky, almost impossible, but it was a path. The plan began to take shape. They wouldn't steal the book. That would only make Samuel a thief and Crowley a victim. They needed more. They needed irrefutable proof. Samuel discovered that Crowley was expecting a visit from a general of the army, a man with the power to legitimize all his possessions in the name of order and progress. The meeting was scheduled in 3 days. It was their only chance. During a stormy night, using the darkness and the thunder's roar to cover his movements, Samuel used the passage Abigail indicated. He managed to reach the shaft and, through a small crack, could see the office. The black book was there, locked in an iron safe, but next to it on the table was the general's letter confirming his arrival. Samuel memorized the seal, the crest, the name. It was a small victory, but it proved the path was real. He returned to Abigail's cabin, his heart pounding in his chest. The plan was audacious. They would not only expose Crowley, but do so in front of the very authority he sought to impress. The town's powerful, who saw Samuel as a broken, defeated man, had laughed and joked about his misfortune. Little did they know that Samuel Travis's silence was just the Texas quiet before the shot of justice. The night of the meeting arrived, shrouding Crowley's mansion in a cloak of darkness and anticipation. Luxurious carriages arrived, bringing wealthy and influential men, all eager to celebrate the colonel's ascent. Inside, whiskey flowed and laughter was loud, the sound of impunity reveling. General Ross Wallace Perry, a man whose reputation for sternness and honor preceded him, was the guest of honor. Crowley treated him with almost servile deference, eager to receive the final blessing for his domain. He opened his safe and took out the black book, placing it on the mahogany table with pride. "Here it is, General. the proof of order and efficiency. Every acre, every transaction, all duly documented for the prosperity of Texas. General Perry was about to pick up the book when the hall doors creaked open slowly. A man entered, and silence fell like a guillotine. He was not a soldier nor a politician. He wore hunter's clothes, simple and worn, but there was an authority in his stride, a calmness in his gaze that silenced everyone. On his shoulder, the old trusty rifle, Betsy, and on his head, the unmistakable coonskin hat, Davy Crockett, the legend himself. The murmur that swept through the hall was a mixture of shock, reverence, and, for Crowley, icy panic. Crockett didn't look at the colonel, his eyes fixed on General Perry. General, his voice was calm, but it resonated with the weight of 1,000 battles and 1,000 stories. I was informed that you've come to bring law to this land. I'm glad to see it, as it's been sorely lacking around here lately. At that moment, from the shadows, emerged Samuel, Travis, and Abigail Merritt. Samuel no longer looked like a defeated man. There was a strength in his posture, the strength of one on the side of truth. Abigail held a roll of old maps, her husband's original surveys. "General," said Samuel, his voice firm and clear, "Colonel Crowley speaks of documents. Well, we've brought some too." Abigail spread the maps on the table next to Crowley's black book. "These are the original surveys of this land, signed and dated by my late husband. They show the true boundaries, the true properties. They show the land that belonged to Samuel Travis and to dozens of other families." Crowley tried to intervene, stammering, "This is nonsense, a farce. This man is a pauper, and this woman a mad woman." But Crockett stepped forward. He took one of Abigail's maps and Crowley's book. He didn't need long. He pointed to an entry in the book. "Curious, Colonel. It says here you acquired Travis's lands on May 10th, but Mrs. Merritt's map, made a year prior, already shows an attempted alteration of the boundary with a handwriting that seems quite familiar to me." Crockett looked directly at Crowley, and for the first time, the colonel felt true fear. A man's honor, Colonel, is not in the papers he buys, but in the word he keeps. And the word of this land says, you are a thief. General Perry, a man of the army who valued reputation above all else, saw his name about to be smudged by the mud of Crowley's greed. He looked at Crockett, the living legend, and at the undeniable evidence. His decision was instant. "Colonel Crowley, you are under arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy against the citizens of Texas." Crowley's henchmen, who moments before had seemed like giants, suddenly shrank. Seeing their master fall, they dropped their weapons and surrendered. Crowley's power, built on fear and false paperwork, crumbled in a single instant. Justice did not come from a gunshot, but from the courage of an ordinary man, the loyalty of a widow, and the presence of a legend who reminded everyone what Texas truly meant. When the people gathered in the square and saw Colonel Crowley being led away in handcuffs by soldiers, no one shouted or cheered. They simply removed their hats in silence. It was a gesture of respect, not for the fall of a tyrant, but for the rise of a man who brought justice without spilling hate. The dust settled, as it always does in Texas. Colonel Lawson McAllister Crowley was taken to Austin, where his black book, once his shield, became his sentence, stripped of his stolen lands, his prestige, and his power. He was condemned to a long sentence, but his true prison was oblivion. His name, once whispered in fear, became a footnote in the history of greedy men who underestimated the soul of this land. Samuel Travis returned to his ranch. The house stood there, silent, waiting for its true owner. With the help of his neighbors, now free from fear, he rebuilt what had been broken. The fence was re-erected. The corn was harvested, and the smell of smoke was replaced by the scent of bread baking in the oven. He didn't celebrate his victory with a party, but with a moment of silence at his father's grave, placing a wildflower on the sacred ground. The promise had been kept. Abigail Merritt found her peace. The truth about her husband came to light. His name was cleared and his honor restored. She sought no reward. Living in a land where justice was possible was enough. The community, inspired by Samuel's courage, changed. People began to look each other in the eye again, to trust one another, remembering that Texas's strength wasn't in its generals or politicians, but in the unity of its ordinary citizens. Before leaving, Davy Crockett found Samuel on the porch of his rebuilt home as the sun set, painting the sky with colors of fire and hope. They didn't speak much. Men of their caliber didn't need to. "You remind me of your father," Crockett said with a nod. He believed honor isn't something you have, but something you do. Texas belongs to men like you, Travis, men who stand up. Crockett mounted his horse and rode off, disappearing over the horizon like the legend he was, leaving behind more than just a man with his land back. He left behind a lesson. Those who fought and died for this land still live in every sunset, in every ranch, in every prayer. Texas does not belong to the one who commands. It belongs to the one who stands. Years later, Samuel, now a gray-haired man, told this story to his grandchildren. He showed them the old deed, now framed on the wall. He tried to destroy that man, the colonel, but ended up destroying himself. In Texas, true vengeance isn't seeing your enemy fall. It's living free, in peace, and with honor, while he lives forever bound to his own past of greed and dishonor. If this story of courage and justice moved you, and if you identify with the pride of defending what is rightfully yours, subscribe to our channel. Share this video with everyone who believes in the strength of honor and family. And don't forget to comment from which city you're watching, so we know how far the spirit of Texas has reached.